Con un veloce shift delle slide a Alessandro Avritzer, adesso Leonardo, scusami.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak here at Milano. I would like to thank Fiorella Distinguio for the invitation, and also the city of Milano. And I first of all have to apologize. I've been here for 5 months in Italy. I still cannot lecture in Italian. Maybe next time. I can take questions in Italian for sure, and I could understand what you said, but still I cannot lecture in Italian. I will start my presentation. My presentation is the different designs or the different formats of political participation in Brazil. And I will start my presentation perhaps trying to locate you a little bit more on where we were in Brazil in 1985 when we started participation and where we are right now. Have been, as I told you, for 5 months in Italy, and I've seen a lot of pessimism. And we are also very pessimistic in Brazil in 1985, so I'll start from this point. In 1985, as Brazil democratized after 21 years of authoritarianism, Brazil was one of the least participatory countries in the world, and the least organized countries in the world. In a research carried out in the city of São Paulo in 1973 by the University of São Paulo, 93% of the respondents say that they did not participate in any association, they did not have any kind of relation with their political representatives. So this is where we started in Brazil after our democratization in 1985. Today, 27 years after democratization, Brazil became one of the most participatory countries in the world. We have 200 experiences of participatory budgeting, around 1,500 experiences of participatory city plans, and around 10,000 councils in health, social assistance, and urban planning. So, the fact that we don't have participation does not mean that we are not going to have participation, and this is where I would like to start from. My second point here is how we built participation in Brazil and which are the available formats of political participation. And in regard to the formation of political participation, I would like to call attention to the issue of constitution making. Latin America has a slightly different tradition of constitution making than Europe or the United States because we revise our constitutions. So we depart from a tradition in which we think that if our constitutions are not, have not been able to deliver the political formats or the political institutions that we need, constitutions need to be revised. So when Brazil democratized in 1985, we started a constitutional assembly and we changed our constitution. And the problem that we faced as we started to rewrite our constitution was our political system. Yeah? And one of the problems is Brazil has a political system, especially a national congress, with very low legitimacy. Political parties exist, but they are not taken very seriously by the population, and especially the National Congress was not really trusted as a place from which new policies may emerge. And that's how, and somehow I have to tell you after 5 months in Italy that I also see lots of similarities. So our problem was what we can do to diminish or lower the dependency of the country as a whole from its political system or its political class, and the issue of participation emerged at that point. The Brazilian Constitution has 14 articles that introduce some form of political participation, from Article 1, that is the most important one, that says that sovereignty rests on the people and it may be exercised through its representatives, but also through other more direct forms of participation. Yeah? So Article 1 of the Brazilian Constitution already pointed out in the direction that people could participate and design institutions directly. From there, we introduced participation in all of the chapters on social policies. So we have a long document. The Brazilian Constitution is the third or fourth longest constitution in the world. It's 500 articles. I don't know how many you have here, but this is long, believe me. India has a longer, and today Ecuador and Bolivia also have longer constitutions, but we are one of the longer constitutions, and the constitution has chapters on most of the social policies, health, social assistance, urban planning, environment, and child and teenager policy. Each one of these chapters has a part on political participation that created the condition for the cities, for the states, and for the national government to introduce participatory policies in these areas. So this is the first point that I would like to stress here, that in order to be able to have a strong trust of participation, it's important to ground it in a legal tradition, and many times also to change an existing legal tradition. Yeah? And I have been in France in October, and one of the interesting things that I learned in France is that there is now within the French Socialist Party a committee to propose constitutional changes in the case the Socialist Party will win the next presidential election. So we can see that the idea that constitutional changes are important for participation is not just a Brazilian idea, but it's also an idea that is making important inroads in Europe as well. So it is from the constitution-making process in Brazil that started in 1987 and led to a new constitution in 1988 that we can speak about participation in Brazil. And to speak about participation in Brazil means to speak about three different types of design. And this is something that I really want to stress here, because Brazil has many participatory designs, but I know that one of them became world famous and everyone talks about it, participatory budgeting. So what I'm going to do in this talk is I will talk a little bit about participatory budgeting, but I will also show that it's one of the limited forms of participation that we have in Brazil, and we also should pay attention to the other formats. Yeah? So The three formats that we have, I call them bottom-up, power sharing, and ratification. Bottom-up participatory budgeting is clearly a bottom-up form of participation. Bottom-up form of participation has four main characteristics. First, it's open-ended at the grassroots level, which means, as many of you know participatory budgeting. Participatory budgeting starts with open assemblies in the regions. So it's open-ended in the sense that each one of the citizens who wants to go to the assemblies, it can go. The assemblies are open, so participatory budgeting is a bottom-up, open-ended form. The second characteristic is participatory budgeting has low involvement of the government, and low involvement of the government has two different meanings. Of course, participatory budgeting needs government initiative, and without government initiative, participatory budgeting could not exist. As a matter of fact, most of the participatory formats need government initiative, but once participatory budgeting is implemented, the government has low involvement, and by low involvement means that the assemblies are civil society or citizens assemblies, the government does not participate. In addition to that, after the assemblies, there is the formation of a citywide body that we call Participatory Budgeting Council, and in this council, the government does not have a voting. It has a seat, but just only talking rights. So this is what really points in direction of low level of government involvement. And the fourth element is participatory budgeting needs, or bottom-up designs need very strong civil society and very strong involvement of the government. What I'm going to show to you is that many times all these characteristics are not in place, but maybe we can also introduce other forms of participation that can compensate or offset from this lack. So here I have just a small table on the expansion of participatory budgeting in Brazil. It started in 1989, 1990 with very few experiences. It went to 13 experiences after some time. And we have today in Brazil 201 experiences. Brazil has 5,500 cities. So participatory budgeting has been introduced in Brazil. It is important in Brazil, but it has been introduced mostly in the south and southeastern parts of Brazil. So here we have a Brazilian map, and with this Brazilian map, Brazil is the opposite of Italy, and the south is more developed than the north, and the northeast are underdeveloped. We don't have a meridional problem in this regard. So this is the map of Brazil, and what we can see is we have very little experiences of participatory budgeting outside the south and southeast of Brazil. Most of the experiences are in 5 states, Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Catarina, Paraná, São Paulo, and Minas Gerais. These are more developed states, and these are also states that have higher human development indexes. So all this I'm pointing out for you to say that participatory budgeting is a form of participation that's very important in Brazil, but it's one that exists in certain parts of the country and is successful in these parts of the country. When we move to power sharing designs, to move to a design that is different from participatory budgeting and different in many respects. The first respect is less participatory in the sense that it's not bottom-up. It's more from the middle. It's more civil society and the state, and many times when I lecture here in Europe, I point out that I think that power-sharing designs are more similar to the European experiences of participation that I know than bottom-up designs, for many reasons. Because civil society is more organized, because state initiative is more important, and because civil society associations usually have more say and more participation in committees, in councils, and this is what I understand by power sharing. Power sharing designs are those that allow for more limited forms of participation at the grassroots level, which does not mean that there is no participation at the grassroots level. The most important form of power sharing design in Brazil is house councils. House councils exist in at least 98% of the Brazilian cities, so around 5,300 cities in Brazil have these councils. These councils, they have originated from the 1988 Constitution, especially from a chapter that says that in order to implement health policies, a government needs to establish a body that has parity in between state and civil society actors. So this is the most important element of power sharing design, is that councils are constituted with the same number of actors. So if in a large city like São Paulo, we have a health council with 70 members, 35 are state members, 35 are civil society members, and these members, they need to discuss and to come to some sort of consensus on the policy that's going to be carried out. So differently from the power sharing, from the bottom-up design, what is the important characteristic of power sharing design is the state has a lot of influence, but civil society also has a lot of influence, and in these designs, what we have frequently is what we call civil society representation. We may talk about it later, but this is the idea that civil society also represents citizens, and that this representation also may have legitimacy in the decision-making on policies. So different from bottom-up designs. What we have here is government involvement together with civil society involvement. So civil society actors, they share decision-making. And the fourth important characteristic of bottom-up designs, of power-sharing designs, is that they are legally institutionalized. Participatory budgeting is not legally institutionalized in the sense that most of the time, I think that we almost have the same legal tradition, so this explanation will make sense. When I am in the United States, I have a tough time explaining it. But most of the time, participatory budgeting is introduced by a decree. It's a decree issued by the mayor, a decree issued by a state governor, and this decree has limited capacity because it can be revoked by another mayor or by a state governor. But when we speak about power sharing designs or health councils, they are built, they are required by the Constitution, and they need to exist in order for federal transference of resources to, or in order for federal resources to be transferred from the federal government to the cities. So the tricky thing about health councils is that if they are not in place, or if they don't approve policies, or if they are disempowered by local governments, federal government can suspend the transference of resources to the cities, and this is an important sanction element, and sanction many times is important for the success of participatory institutions. So here I have a table on local policy councils in Brazil. They exist in health in 98% of the cities. They exist in social assistance area in almost 95% of the cities. They also exist in other policies, especially environmental and child and teenager policies. In all these areas, there are transferences from the federal government. It's in Portuguese. So, health, saúde, social assistance, assistência social, education, labor, environment, tourism, so quality. Good, great. Yeah. Orçamento é bilancio. So in all these areas exist councils in Brazil, and these councils are very important for the specific policies. These councils, they work, I think, very well in large cities. We don't have much data on how they work in small cities, but most of the time they work if civil society is organized enough in a city to make an important representation in this area. And the third form of public participation in Brazil that I would like to talk with you is what we called ratification designs. And the ratification is, again, ratification has a lot to do with the 1988 Constitution. It is the direct result of some of the chapters of the 1988 Constitution, especially the chapter on urban planning. The chapter on urban planning is a chapter that has as its main aim the democratization of the access of the urban land to the poor in Brazil. As you know, Brazil has very large cities. In addition to that, Brazilian cities grow very fast. São Paulo had 4 million people in 1964, and today has in between 15 and 16 million people. City of Porto Alegre had 250,000 people in 1964, today it has 1.3. Belo Horizonte had around 300,000 people in 1964, today it has over 2 million. So Brazilian cities grow, and Brazilian cities grow very fast, and the problem is how to organize their growth. In this regard, I think Brazil and Italy are different. I've been to lots of cities that have about the same population in the last 50, 100 years, so the cities are not growing, but still the fact that Brazilian cities grow create problems, especially for land tenure of the urban poor. So still in the 80s emerged an important movement in Brazil called Movimento Nacional pela Reforma Urbana, National Movement for Urban Reform, and this movement went to the Constitution and could approve many important devices in the Constitution that organized in a better way urban growth, among them the concept of the right to the city. The idea is that individuals have the right to the city, and the right to the city involves the right to participate in important decisions on urban planning, and one of these, the Constitution also requires that every large city in Brazil with more than 50,000 people should have a city master plan, and a city master plan needs to be approved through public audiences. So what are public audiences? Public audiences are meetings that are called by the city, and citizens go there and they can either approve or reject city master plan. And this is exactly what we call the ratification element in participatory policies. Yeah? Ratification is different from power sharing and bottom-up, because in ratification there is not the deliberation in the process of designing the plan or the power sharing in the process of designing the plan, but the plan needs approval. And the fact that the plan needs approval means that governments cannot do whatever they want. As a matter of fact, there is also a mandatory and a sanction element in ratification designs. The mandatory element is city cannot just commission a plan, send to city council and approve it. It needs the public audiences, as I mentioned, but also there is a sanction element, and the sanction element is if a city does not carry out public audiences, the legal system can block or even cancel the city master plan, and there have been many cases like that in Brazil. Yeah? Salvador, for instance, in Northeast, had its city master plan cancelled by the legal system. São Paulo had phases in the elaboration of its city master plan cancelled by the legal system. So the legal system becomes actively involved when city master plan are elaborated, and this is very important because many times some regions of the city are going to become regions for development, and then there is, let's say, the land flipping interest. Other parts of the city, there are going to be important prohibitions for new constructions, and this also bothers those who like land flipping. So the value of the land and those who own land in the cities are very interested in city master plans, and either they go or they try to block the public audiences. Then public audiences for city master plans are very important in Brazil. So far there have been I'm not wrong, 2,148 participatory city master plans in Brazil. 800 are under revision right now, which means that many of the city master plans pass through revisions, and these revisions are also very polemic. As a matter of fact, the law in Brazil requires every city with more than 50,000 people to revise its city master plan every 10 years, and then it can evaluate which part of the cities grew, which parts of the city did not grow so much, and this becomes a process of evaluation. So here, what they have is the map of Brazil with all the regions and the number of cities, of Brazilian cities located in each one of the regions. Brazil then has 5 main regions, but most of the cities, as you can see, are located in the south and southeast. 54.6 of the Brazilian cities, no, about 21.3 of the Brazilian cities are in the southern region, and 30% are in the southeast. Together, this makes more than 50% of the Brazilian cities. We can also see that city master plans have been carried out more in some regions, more developed regions, cities with higher human development index, the cities with the regions with more organized civil society are those have been carrying out city master plans. So what we can make from this idea of 3 different forms of participation, that we can apply them in different situations. First thing is that I defend is that participation has to be applied according to context. And though this seems, or according to political and social context. And though it seems a rather obvious issue, it has not been that obvious because some of these forms of participation became much more important than others. Some are more well known than others, and here people who spoke before me talked about communication, and this means that many times policymakers, they think that they just have a choice between participation and non-participation, when as a matter of fact, policymakers have a choice between participation in different formats. And I think that this is very important. Which of the formats to choose when we want to introduce participation? My point is participation through participatory budgeting is very empowering, but it's also very demanding. And it's very demanding both to civil society actors and to policymakers, and many times policymakers don't want to commit themselves so much to this very broad form of participation, and they think, well, then there is no way I cannot carry out participation. My point here is no, participation can be carried out in many formats, and we need to know these formats better, and I'm not claiming here that my three designs are the only ones. As a matter of fact, I think that, and I would be very happy to learn that there is a fourth or a fifth format, So I think that we need to understand better what are the formats of participation and when they should be carried out. My second issue is we can also introduce participation in stages, and most of the time, and most of the Brazilian cities, when we look back to these 27 years of participation in Brazil since democratization, none of the Brazilian cities introduced participatory budgeting, house councils, city master plans, social assistance council at the same time. With time, all these formats were available, and all these forms of participation, they work in Brazil, but they were not introduced simultaneously. So my second point here is participation can be introduced in phases, and as the population responds to the different formats, policymakers may be able to move from one phase to another. And I think this is also important because city may want to introduce participatory budgeting without having all the conditions, and one of the important ideas is perhaps a city master plan may be a good starting point from there to move to participatory budgeting or to other forms of participation. So my second point is we should pay more attention to the issue of stages and stages in the introduction of participation. My third point is we can use participation for many things. We would like to use participation always to bring more distribution of access to public goods, more public infrastructure. But the case of City Master Plan in Brazil also shows that sometimes it's very important to use participation to block some policies that policymakers want to introduce, and the blocking issue is very important. I'm here for a very little time, but I've heard about the plebiscite, and one of the issues of the plebiscite was whether to introduce or not private water policies, if I'm not wrong. So somehow I think that's exactly the same issue. Population should be consulted not only for what it wants, but many times it's also important to consult the population on what it does not want. And many of these formats of participation work very well for that, especially ratification designs. And my fourth point is it's important to introduce participation into law, because when participation is introduced into law, we can guarantee a long-term implementation of the processes if the legal system is willing to help. Yeah? And this has happened in Brazil many times. Workers' Party administrations introduced participatory budgeting or health councils in a few cities, but other conservative administrations did not want to have anything with participation, but once it was introduced into law, it could be guaranteed by the legal system, and once it is guaranteed by the legal system, it can be incorporated into the legal behavior of the citizens or the legal expectations of the citizens, and then citizens would be the ones who are going to demand participation because they would know that they have the right to participate. So I'm not going to go much longer than that, but I think that these are ideas that are important to be discussed if we want to forward participation here in Europe. Thank you. Technology, yeah. The start of participation in Brazil coincided, but still, when participation emerged in Brazil, internet technologies were just starting, yeah? So, initially, all participatory budgeting meetings were face-to-face, the council was face-to-face, health councils and health council, Brazilian law, so I didn't elaborate on that, but the Brazilian law also calls for every 2 years for national conferences, and Lula's government implemented many conferences. They used to be also face-to-face. So all these formats were initially face-to-face. What's taking place right now is that we are introducing technology to improve participation, to create more incentives for middle-class people to participate in participatory budgeting, where most of the participants were more labor class or poor participants. So which are the technologies available, yeah? Or used. One, to call for the meetings, yeah? Right now we use many technologies to call for the meeting. For instance, in a few cities in Brazil, in the day of a participatory budgeting meeting, you receive a phone call from the mayor. And it makes a lot of difference. You say, well, if the mayor is calling me, I'm gonna go. Yeah? And then this is a way that you can use technology to improve participation. And it's interesting because this electronic phone call technologies have been available for very long, but they have not been implemented in participation. In the US, it's very common, for instance, in the election day, you receive a call from the president and say, well, please go and vote for my re-election. But it's not used to tell people, well, I want you to participate in the policy-making process. And we have data from a few cities in Brazil that show that once the mayor calls you, attendance at these meetings is increased. Second technology, some process of participatory budgeting take electronic votes. Yeah? And this has been implemented in Belo Horizonte for very big public works. So participatory budgeting in Belo Horizonte involves voting on 8 major public works, and then from the process there is elaboration of a choice of 16, sometimes 20 choices, and then there is this big vote, and then this has increased a lot participation, though it's a participation that many people are critical in the sense that it becomes very easy to vote, but the debate, the problem is also how to improve the quality of this debate, yeah? So, in Belo Horizonte, for instance, in this major public works, around 150,000 people vote, which is close to 10% of the city population, so it's a lot, but it's more topical, yeah? The other meetings continue to be face-to-face interaction meetings. A third technology, and I've been involved in that lately, and we're trying to improve it, is for some of the national conferences, we have been organizing online debates before the conferences to improve the debates. So, for instance, we just did that our university in Minas Gerais before the National Health Conference that took place in late November of last year. There was an electronic platform with debates on the major issues. And then you could download talks with different positions, and then at a certain time there would be an electronic debate on certain issues. But so far we did not introduce decision making in these electronic platforms, not because of technological limitations. We could, but it's not clear for us if we have already reached a stage in which we could take this decision. But among the 2,000 delegates for the conference, I think that 400 logged and 250 posted messages in the platform. Yeah? So that's what we have so far regarding technology. Habeas data. Habeas data is a very good idea. I'm not sure that it works very well so far, but it's the idea that individuals can have access to government data about themselves and government data in general. Yeah?
What do you do?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and the Constitution created the process of publicity. In many things it happens. For instance, if you take a public examination in Brazil to enter the university, you can ask to see your test. And this has shown that many times some of the tests were wrongly corrected. Yeah, so you can ask for that. Even at the university level today, if there is an examination for the master or for a PhD, everything needs to be public in a few weeks. Yeah, and people may have access to that. But when it comes to decision process, that was what I was going to. When it comes to decision process and government, the courts have not been so liberal in granting habeas data. For instance, the Ministry of Foreign Relations argues that many of the policies cannot be publicized because it involves other governments, and this government demands secrecy. Yeah? Or regarding the national budget, individuals can have access to a large part of the budget. And for instance, even credit cards used by public employees at the federal administration, after a few years the bill became public. And many scandals emerged after that because retroactively you see people going to very fancy restaurants with public money, and other things, yeah, that you can imagine, yeah. So these are the levels, yeah. So retroactively, today, for instance, regarding expenses of the federal government, just the first year of the federal government, the credit cards are not public, but even after some time they would become. Yeah? So these expenses are submitted to
Do you agree with the principle?
Oh, of course I do, and I think it helps a lot in controlling corruption, yeah, first of all, yeah. I also, at the university, make things for us a little bit more difficult, but also more democratic. No one can just, for instance, say, this guy is in, this guy is out, and there is no criteria, yeah. Pontos de cultura. I don't know very well. I know that they exist, and I know that this is maybe a project from the Ministry of Culture. They exist together with internet kiosks, but I don't think that they have a broad effect on democratization of the access to culture. They exist in every city, but in a few places. Yeah. I don't think that it's something very broad in the country that really democratized access to information and culture, not so far. Yeah? Qualification of the participatory process. Yeah, I think that this is really important, and it takes place every participatory process, in my view. You may want it to be very, very broad. At some level, you will need representation and a certain sort of election of delegates in order to be more selective for the decision making on specific policies. Yeah? And this has happened in all the forms in Brazil, for instance. Participatory budgeting has a participatory budgeting council, 44 people. Yeah? At least in Porto Alegre, 44. The national conferences carried out by the federal government, they elect committees or a selected group of members to oversee the implementation of the decisions. This is qualification of the process. The councils, they all have what we call câmaras técnicas, or technical chambers, that would be in charge of specific decisions. So, for instance, when we discuss health policies in large Brazilian cities, one of the main issues is which kind of complex services will be available and where. Yeah? You cannot, for instance, in a city like São Paulo that has 196 sub-regions, you cannot have 196 complex services in all regions. So this is a big debate in São Paulo, because if you live in the downtown part of São Paulo, you may be 15-20 minutes from a very good health service, but you can also live in the city of São Paulo and be 2 hours from a complex service, and 2 hours, and these 2 hours may be the difference between life and death. So where to locate? So there is this debate about democratizing the distribution of health services in the city, but it cannot be located everywhere because there is not enough money. So what the city of São Paulo does, and it emerged in debates in the health councils. It decentralized service according to the average human development index. So you make sure that cities that are less poor will have also complex services, not only the cities that in which the wealthy population lives. Yeah. In every form of qualification, you have certification, and the problem is how you certify participation. For instance, in a work that I did on participatory budgeting in early 2002, I pointed out that there was a gender stratification for Porto Alegre that was very clear. Women participated more in the regional meetings, but they were less represented in the council. Yeah? Eventually, the city introduced policies to make sure that women would not be less represented. But this is an issue. Usually in Brazil, the main element involved in certification is really years of education. Yeah, we can see it. Years of education in Brazil is still very low. By the end of the authoritarian regime, the average Brazilian had only 5.5 years of school, yeah, in 1985. Today it's 8. It's improved, but still very low given the developed world standards, although I think that we may be able to improve this very fast. But still, I would say the major certification is people vote for delegates and councillors that have the same income but more education. Yeah? And this many times helps the qualification of the participatory process, but still we need what we call capacitação in Brazil, which is every person who is elected for a participatory process, it goes to a course. And this course is about health policy, complex. So it needs to be formed on what's going to decide about. Yeah? How many people participate? In Porto Alegre, the average participation is around 40,000 people per year in a population of 1.3. So in participatory budgeting, participation is around 2.53% of population. Belo Horizonte is similar. Population is 2 million, it's around 70,000 people. So more or less the same amount. In some processes that are less demanding, we see more participation. So for instance, some of the conferences that Lula's government carried out between 2002 and 2010 got around 6 million participants in a population of 180 million. Yeah? So many Brazilians, 41% of the Brazilians know about the conferences, yeah? And around 12-13% of the population participated at some level of this process. Of course, the majority at the local level. Again, certification, and we need to see which kind of certification takes place. But I would say that at the local level, when a process is successful, is 2-3%.
Qualche altra domanda ce n'era lì? Mi sembrava che ce ne fossero lì 2 o 3.
Mi ha colpito quando lei ha parlato di un decreto del sindaco per avviare il processo partecipativo, che non è legalizzato, ma è aperto politicamente dal sindaco, come se, per dire, a Milano, il sindaco di Milano lanciasse una discussione di bilancio sui lavori dell'Expo, per dire, chiedendo alla popolazione e eleggendo, diciamo, come lei ha detto, dei rappresentanti e formando dei rappresentanti a discutere dell'argomento fino ad arrivare a una decisione finale, per esempio. Cioè ho l'impressione, da quello che lei ha detto, che il processo partecipativo in Brasile sia molto centrato su issue, su grandi temi delle città, che fanno discutere le persone e le fanno portare poi a delle codecisioni, delle decisioni partecipate, ma non vanno a vedere la singola voce di bilancio o la singola spesa del più minuscolo assessorato, ma vanno a vedere i grandi obiettivi. Mi sono sbagliato o è così?
Vuoi mettere insieme le domande? Sì, facciamo 2 o 3 poi ce ne
allora, velocissimamente sulla formazione, a dispetto di 5 anni, poi nel mondo del lavoro formazione permanente è assicurata E l'altra domanda è, il distretto finanziario, il mondo delle banche, quale influenza ha nella proposizione e nella decisione dei piani urbanistici? Perché da noi diciamo che ha molta influenza e che la parola magica era project financing, cioè tanto non ci costa nulla perché le banche hanno assicurato, e così noi abbiamo stravolto dei pezzi di città perché a cavallo nato non si guarda in bocca.
Però parliamo
Dopo lo traduciamo.
Io ho due domande. Nella prima si tratta della forma di ratificazione di cui ha parlato. Vorrei sapere se ci sono le regole legali che dicono quanti abitanti devono partecipare perché un progetto sia accettato, nel senso quante persone devono venire a partecipare e qual è quota delle persone che devono votare sì, se ci sono delle regole che lo dicono. E poi vorrei anche sapere, perché ha detto che normalmente il 3% della popolazione partecipa, per esempio in Porto Alegre, e vorrei sapere chi sono i partecipanti, qual è la caratteristica sociale, quali sono i profili di questi partecipanti, se può dirci una o due parole su questo, grazie.
Tentare di stare nel programma.
Your question, if I understood, is people do not discuss the budget, but they discuss what they want to be inserted in the budget. Yeah, and this regard, it's not exactly that, but it's very close to that. Well, how the process starts in Porto Alegre, or Belo Horizonte, or right now in Recife, which also has a good participatory budgeting. The first, the mayor or the secretary of planning, he goes and he tells the participants how much money they will have. Yeah, so he releases the investment figure, because participatory budgeting is mostly about investment figures. Yeah, so he releases the investment figures for the participants. Given that what there is financially is a negotiation among regions of the city, because one of the main elements of participatory budgeting is that the regions of the city, they negotiate how much public works they will have according to how much money they had in the past and how much access to public goods the region has. So, for instance, access to public goods in even in a city like Porto Alegre can vary a lot. For instance, some parts of Porto Alegre have 99% of pavement. Other regions, when participatory budgeting started, had just 35–40% of its streets paved. Even sewage lines in Porto Alegre were very unevenly distributed, public lightnings. So the financial negotiations are in between the regions and the participants from the regions. And what Porto Alegre did is that it introduced technical criteria, that is public access, previous access to public goods. And with this technical table, that's very interesting, I don't have it here, otherwise I would show, some regions can claim for less money than others. And this is one of the ways that the public budget was made more even to all the regions. But for a poor person who goes to a regional assembly in Porto Alegre, it does not discuss the items in the budget, but what he discusses is how many children will be enrolled in school, how many doctors will be at the health post, or how many kilometers of pavement are going to be made in that region, or how many tons of garbage collection would be added to the existing capacity. Yeah? For informazioni. Maybe urban plans in Brazil are a little bit different, I don't know, because the main issue when you make a city-urban program in Brazil is new region, how much you're going to construct there, an old region, whether it's already saturated or not, and if it's saturated, the city imposes heavy taxation on new construction, and in other regions that are, let's say, underdeveloped and the city wants to develop, which kind of incentives the city is going to give for construction. These are the major issues. What happened is the bankers are not very much interested in that, but real estate developers are, yeah, because decisions of the city master plan may make a lot of difference, yeah. But real estate developers, they don't like to go to public meetings, yeah, because they don't want to argue. They're going to, well, I'm holding this piece of land for 50 years, and now I'm going to pay taxation on that. No one wants to go to a meeting to make this point. So what they did in Belo Horizonte, São Paulo, Porto Alegre is that real estate holders, they constituted real estate associations, and these real estate associations have lawyers, and these lawyers speak very well, and they go to the meetings and they try to defend his interests. Yeah, it doesn't work most of the time. But the interesting thing is, for instance, in São Paulo there was a legal dispute whether a real estate company could qualify as a civil society association, and in the end the city didn't want, but eventually the courts allowed. So the city master plan had to be interrupted, resumed after that, or remade after that. But in the end, these lawyers, they went, and they lost almost everything that they claimed. But still they can go to city council, and then city council level, you know, the negotiation is a little bit different. Yeah, when you're a lawyer from a big real estate holder, have other forms of influence than just talk, yeah, as we know. So these are the main issues in the city master plan. In São Paulo, for instance, city council changed some of the elements of the plan. The city council changed the last minute, in spite of the fact that it has been approved in the public audiences. Yeah, but still the plan was much better than what the city had before. So I would say the participation helped the city to have a more progressive plan. As you can imagine, city like São Paulo has huge real estate interests depending on if you can construct 10 stories or 50. Makes a lot of difference in the value of the land, and this eventually becomes one of the issues that are involved in the city master plan. Ratification. Ratification is the law. What Brazil did after the chapter on urban planning of the 1988 Constitution was to elaborate a more specific law called Estatuto da Cidade, Estatuto da Città. And the statute of the city established lots of preconditions for these public ordinances. And just to tell you a case about Salvador, in which the city master plan was cancelled. City master plan was cancelled because the city, that's very touristic, commissioned a private contractor to make a city master plan, and city master plan was very conservative and pro hotels and touristic interests, and in the end the city could not approve it in the public audiences, so it did one instead of two, And this one was in a holiday, in a day after a holiday. I think you call that Ponte, yeah. It was a Ponte day, yeah. No one went, and in the end, it had to be revised. City sent it to City Council. It was approved, but it was cancelled by the judicial system. And then they had to make many other public audiences. In the end, they wanted to liberate the seaside of the city for hotel constructions, and they couldn't. Yeah, that was the major issue involved. So the law does not say a lot, but when it comes to the legal system, the city needs to defend itself, saying that it did a reasonable amount of consulting, yeah, of hearing, yeah, and this reasonable amount in the case of Salvador did not take place. Who is the average participant? In Porto Alegre, it's very clear. The average participant is a woman, 53–54% of the participants. She's poor, but she's not the poorest person in the city. So she's a poor person who makes about the average. She's about the average income in Brazil, which is 4 minimum wages, around 1,000 euros today. This woman, she has children. She is in between 30 and 45, yeah, and she has more schooling than the average Brazilian woman, but not a lot more, between 7 and 8 years, yeah, of school. So this is the average participant, but this is not the average participant in councils, and this is not the average participant at the national level. As you go to councils at the national level, income and education increases. Yeah?
Can I ask you? Tu hai detto che avete cercato di consolidare la partecipazione nella legge. In che misura a livello nazionale, come hai detto sulla Costituzione, ma anche a livello locale? O in altre parole, visto che siamo al Comune di Milano, se si può imparare da esperienze analoghe per mettere nello statuto di un comune dei obblighi alla partecipazione, in modo tale che nel passaggio da un'amministrazione all'altra questo impegno possa restare.
Well, Brazil is a federation, and we have constitutions at the national and state level, and we have what we call, in English won't make sense, but maybe you understand that in Italian, lei organica municipale. Yeah? A sort of city law that it's not the daily law, but it's very difficult to change. Yeah, most of the cities that do participation in Brazil, they have participation written in the lei organica. Yeah, this does not mean that if you elect a very conservative mayor who wants to disempower the city, that we won't be able, but it's going to be more difficult. So, for instance, cities that have had more participation in Brazil, a process of participation continued in spite of changes in administration. Yeah. So I would say that this is important, but in order for participation to continue, you need to have it really ingrained in the political culture of the city. And I'm just going to give you two examples. Porto Alegre continued with participatory budgeting after the Workers' Party was defeated. As a matter of fact, that the election was very close, and one of the themes that emerged last week was participatory budgeting, and the opposition, in order to win, had to say, well, we're going to continue with it, and that's why they continued. They had to publicly declare that they would continue. In the case of city of São Paulo, that's more sort of left and right city. The Workers' Party governs and then is defeated, and then conservative people govern the city, and then the Workers' Party comes back. There was participatory budgeting during the Marta Suplicy administration, but it has been discontinued immediately after her defeat. So, and in the two cases, participation was inscribed into the law. So, I think that the right answer is, it's good to write it into the law, but it's only going to continue if the citizen, the normal citizen, has it as something important that he wants to keep. Otherwise, even if it's written into the law, mayors or other power holders would be able to